Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason, President of Spiritual Awakenings International. Welcome to Spiritual Awakenings International Presents. So we're delighted to have you here today. We love to know where people are joining us from. So please take a moment now and just write into the chat where it is that you're joining us from today. Spiritual Awakenings International is in 76 countries around the world, so we are absolutely delighted about that. Now, today we have a very special event. We're going to have two speakers, both of whom are directors at the Coincidence Project, Dr. Bernard Beitman and Dr. Juliet Trail. So save your questions for the end of the second speaker, because we will have a question and answer period at the end where you can ask questions of both of the speakers who are going to be speaking today. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bernard Beitman. He is the founding director of the Coincidence Project, which encourages people to share their synchronicities and serendipity stories. Dr. Beitman is a psychiatrist and former chair of psychiatry at the University of Missouri, Columbia. He has a private practice in Charlottesville, Virginia. Dr. Beitman went to Yale Medical School and did his psychiatric residency at Stanford. And he's the author of a wonderful new book, Meaningful Coincidences: How and Why Serendipity Happen. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Bernard Beitman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yvonne. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for asking us to be here. I am going to talk about some elements of my book in this talk, and we'll begin now. The title of the book, as Yvonne mentioned, is Meaningful Coincidences: How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. And why and how they happen is just part of the fun of this business. And now the arrows at the bottom are not appearing. There they are. This is the book cover, and it has in it a golden spiral in the sky. And the golden spiral is a representative of fractals, and fractals are repeated patterns. And repeated patterns are the basis of meaningful coincidences. And some of you, or many of you, are, as I understand it, have experienced near-death experiences. And a colleague of mine, Bruce Grayson, many of you who may know because he's written an excellent book on near-death experiences, looked at the relationship between NDEs and the reports of meaningful coincidences. And he found, using the Weird Coincidence Survey that I had helped to construct, that once people started having near-death experiences, their meaningful coincidences increased after the NDE. So many of you know about meaningful coincidences, and I hope to supplement what you already have experienced with ideas and concepts that may help you even further understand and use meaningful coincidences in your lives. Research clearly demonstrates that the meaningful coincidences happen a lot, and that's my research has helped with that, and particularly during times of transition, which we are in now. These are tumultuous times. And what I'll talk about is, what are they? What are the most common ones, and how can they be cultivated? A meaningful coincidence is the coming together of two or more events in a surprising and unexpected way, with no apparent explanation. It's important to mention no apparent explanation because it suggests there might be one. And once there is an explanation, it's no longer a coincidence. And here's a meaningful coincidence, at least to some people. Here's a nautilus shell, which you can find in the sea and in the earth, and a spiral in the sky, a spiral galaxy. So here we have a match between something on Earth and something in the universe. And it's another way of saying as above, so below. And how does that happen becomes a question. And here's another, what I think is a meaningful coincidence. It's a solar eclipse. A solar eclipse, the sun and the moon passes in front of the sun, and they appear to be about the same size, and yet they're 93 million miles apart. How does that happen? And that's a question for a lot of speculation, but it's a meaningful coincidence that we can't understand yet, but there it is right there in front of us. And what I'm suggesting that this means for us is pay attention to meaningful coincidences. They might be useful to you. They carry four meanings usually. An example was my father and I choking simultaneously 3,000 miles apart. And that was a strange experience. It was very meaningful to me for obvious reasons. And the four aspects of meaningful coincidences that we pay attention to usually are an emotional charge like surprise or more, as with my father and me, a strong similarity between the incidents of the coincidence, like two people dressed the same without prior arrangement, or here two people choking uncontrollably 3,000 miles apart around the same time. They also can be a personal meaning, like a suggestion. My father died on my birthday, so that suggestion was to keep my father's memory alive by continuing to tell this story, and an intuitive sense that perhaps this coincidence can be explained. And I've looked at ways to explain this coincidence. The phrase meaningful coincidence serves as an umbrella term for four distinct types of meaningful coincidences. And they're fun to look at because, look, there's an S in front of each one of them and an ITY at the end of them. Synchronicity usually involves spiritual, psychological, and or interpersonal development, like helping to connect two people through shared experience. Serendipity involves those happy accidents where you find something of value in a surprising and unusual way. Discovery of penicillin is a paradigmatic example of that. Seriality, which is what I'm just demonstrating, the S and the ITY, where you can see a series of things that anybody else can see. All of us can see the SITY. A lot of coincidence, meaningful coincidences happen one incident in the mind and another in the environment. A seriality is all observable by anybody who wants to look. Simulpathity is the experiencing of the pain of a loved one at a distance, which is the story that began with the story of my father. And it's the name I have given to that experience, the pain of a loved one at a distance. What are the most common meaningful coincidences? Well, I put together a survey, the Meaningful Coincidence Survey, which you can take at the website, my website, which is coincider.com, or take it at the coincidenceproject.net. That these are the four most common coincidences that we found. I think of an idea and hear it or see it on the radio, TV, or internet, and sometimes in books too. I think of calling someone only to have that person unexpectedly call me. I advance in my work, career, education by being in the right place at the right time. That's really a fun one. How do you end up sitting next to somebody and start a conversation with them, and now you got a job? I mean, that's those are fun ones, and they really help. And one of the more valuable, useful ones that I find and other people do, thinking of a question only to have it answered by an external source, radio, TV, other people, or just even a random book that you're reading. Now, when you think about, I think of an idea or see it on the radio, or hear it on the radio, TV, or internet, or I think of calling someone, it suggests we have capacities that modern science, modern psychology doesn't want to admit that we have. And I'm trying to be able to bring synchronicity into the psychology, which is mainstream and hard. They're hard to get through to because they don't want to think telepathy is real, but it is. And this calling someone that you haven't heard of for a long time is a perfect example. How do you recognize meaningful coincidences? Well, probably a lot of you are already recognizing them, having had NDEs, and then we started to look around and saying, hey, things ain't just quite the way I was told they are, because NDEs make you know that the reality that we're told is not the reality that we are experiencing truly. You have to have some idea what a coincidence is that's meaningful. You can't recognize it unless you've seen it before. My job and my colleague Julia Trail's job in all this, and the Coincidence Project intention, is to help increase your understanding of what a meaningful coincidence actually is, so that you can, when you see it again, you'll say, oh, look, a meaningful coincidence. Maybe I should do something with this. And knowing common coincidences like the ones I just mentioned, thinking of someone and they contact you that you haven't heard from for a while, or being in the right place at the right time. One of my favorites is, how do you get to where you need to be without knowing how you got there? There's lots of stories like that. And many people just think they're alone when that happens. No, these weird events are common. My research shows it. All the stories people tell each other show it. These coincidence things are happening in our lives. Just, we got to notice them, and they can be useful in trying to figure out how reality works. One of my favorite problems. And how do you increase them? Keep your own diary, your coincidence diary, look for patterns in them, read about them, read my book, Meaningful Coincidences, read other books. Recognition is the first step. You need to believe then that they can be useful, or why bother? They can be useful in many different ways. They can confirm that you are in the flow, giving you the feeling that you are just where you need to be. They can help with decision-making by tilting the yes-no scale in one direction or another. You can hear a song on the radio that gives you confidence to ask for that raise or promotion, or ask somebody to be your partner. They can give you information. As I've been mentioning, you may find yourself sitting next to a stranger. And the key thing is to feel, if you feel the urge to start a conversation, that's important to listen to. If you don't ask, if you don't move, if you don't say something, you're going to miss potentially good information or a good connection, or both, from the person who's sitting next to you. And as happened with my father and me, they show you connections with other people that you didn't know existed. One of the key ideas of the Coincidence Project is to illuminate the invisible currents that connect and unify us. And they do that. And they can show us the web of interactions. Yes, everything's connected, but they show us how we're connected. That's the next question. How are we connected? And coincidence helps to show the way. You can cultivate them in many different ways. You can tell your coincidence stories to friends and relatives who might be interested. And unfortunately, a lot of people say, oh, what's the big deal? But more and more people are contacting us and saying, I experience this a lot. And I'm so glad, as has happened with NDE organizations, that you find like-minded people with similar experiences. Keep a diary. And again, look for patterns in them, read about them, as I mentioned. And Juliet Trail, who's coming on after me here, and I have created the Coincidence Cafe through the Coincidence Project. It's a once-monthly Zoom meeting from 11 to 12:30 Eastern Time in the United States. And again, you can get an invitation to the Coincidence Project if this interests you, to the Coincidence Cafe, by going to our website, thecoincidenceproject.net. And maybe you want to increase your coincidence sensitivity. Maybe you want to figure out what you can do to increase the likelihood that you're going to experience coincidences. Well, how might that happen? It's increased during altered states of consciousness, which can be induced by meditation, mind-altering drugs. Yes, mind-altering drugs. I spent a good deal of time in Haight-Ashbury in the late 60s, and psychedelics increased the likelihood of seeing meaningful coincidences. There were signs around that said, synchronicity spoken here. And it was. There were so many of them. I had to, like, as in the phrase of the time, say, stop myself from being blown out by all of them. And this was one of the fertile grounds for my finally coming to you and talking to you about coincidences, because there's so many of them in those times. They also happen during major life transitions, and all of these experiences and others de-automatize conventional thinking. They stop you from thinking in their regular ways. In brain terms, they slow down the default mode network in your brain that is like holding on to who you are and your reality, the views of reality. And you begin to then make up new stories, and we all need stories about how things work. Your willingness to seize opportunities in a narrow time window, like sitting next to somebody, take a chance. And if you want to know how sensitive you are to coincidence, go to the coincidenceproject.net and take our weird coincidence survey. Context really matters. Coincidences are created by intersections of events, usually the events of your mind and the events around you. Well, just imagine that the faster the thoughts go on in your mind, and the faster you're moving in your environment, or if the faster your environment's going, the more intersections you're going to have. So you're going to increase the probability of a meaningful intersection. And that can happen with other people, happen at dance, can happen with the media, and it can happen in nature. Your speed, but paying attention is crucial. The greater your need, the higher your emotions, the more drive you have to move and search, will further increase the numbers of event intersections. Your thoughts and feelings may speed up, like moving through space, and increase the number of mind-environment intersections. An increased number of intersections, coupled with higher coincidence sensitivity, will produce more coincidences. But as you think about all this, remember that meaningful coincidences are not commands. Some people take them as commands. Well, I've got to do this because there are 3 people in Costa Rica that are doing what I need to do, so I got to fly down from Texas to go see them. Well, not necessarily. They're suggestions. They're suggestions like from somebody who cares about you, but we do have some element of free will. We can decide. And whether you should go or not is finally your decision. They help us in many different ways. For example, a woman finishing the night shift at a factory steps outside the building with her cup of coffee to gaze at the rising morning sun. The sky is filled with gorgeous hues. She sighs with heartfelt gratitude, breathing in its vibrant beauty. As she walks back to the office, she trips on a rock, spilling the coffee over her gray work shirt. The hot liquid forms the shape of a heart right over her heart. She laughs and enters more deeply into that magical moment. Hers was a brief spiritual experience, being in the oneness facilitated by the accidental coffee stain. Coincidences make us have to think more closely about being in the present, about being with the now, and being in the now helps you think about what that coincidence might mean to you. So as you have listening to me talk, I'm encouraging you to wonder about the coincidences that you've had in your own life and what they might mean to you. Are they suggestions? Are they just simply bringing you into the moment? I had a wonderful dinner with somebody in Denver, Colorado once, and I thought that with a lot of coincidences with her that we might want to work together in some form or another. But no, she had her own thing, I had my thing. And that taught me that that moment we had together and the coincidences around it were just for that moment. Sometimes the coincidences don't mean something about the future. They only mean like walking into a beautiful museum or seeing a sunset or seeing what this woman experienced with the coffee spill on her shirt. They only can be something for the moment. On the other hand, I'm very concerned, as many of you probably are, about the state of the world. There are lots of problems going on. And those of you who are listening to this probably are well aware of that. I am. And what I'm trying to contribute through the Coincidence Project and through other means is to be able to use synchronicity and serendipity as ways to help you find your purpose in life. There's a lot of talk of purpose, and people tell you how you should do it. I prefer to suggest do it yourself with a little guidance from others who are experiencing something like you, that the coincidences, the meaningful coincidences of your life can help you know what you need to be doing to not only satisfy your need for purpose, but also to satisfy the need humanity has for your contribution to what we are doing to our planet, to our nest, to how we are committing a very slow suicide of humanity. I suggest to you that each of us is part of a collective human organism, that each of us is a cell in this organism. And each of our cells is trying to find what is my purpose and who are the people with whom to share this purpose. SAI is a place where you're sharing purpose, you're sharing meaning, you're sharing togetherness, you're sharing an attempt to help expand world consciousness about the nature of reality. You're finding people who are part of your clan, part of your group, part of your tribe. How will SAI help contribute to the problems, to contribute to alleviating the problems that humanity is creating for itself? I'm a psychiatrist, and I think one of the biggest problems in humanity is not necessarily all the plastic in the ocean, major problem, the greediness of big business, big problem, the divisiveness of politics. But when I get down to it, it's the difficulty people have getting along with each other. And the coincidences of your life and the coincidences of other people's lives can show you how you are connected with each other, and then build on those connections to find other connections, to feel the web that you are part of, the spider that you are in the middle of this web, connecting with other people in the web, in their own webs, that are part of what you need to recognize so that you feel and experience, as well as know, your place in the greater good in trying to be able to help humanity not do what it is doing. Now, one of the ways that I ask you to think about this is consider our mental atmosphere, which is both mental and emotional and spiritual. And our mental atmosphere, the psychosphere is something like our air atmosphere. We breathe in energy and information. We breathe out energy and information with the psychosphere. In that psychosphere is the web of connection. And you can experience how you're connected through other people and even understand how telepathy works through it. You can recognize your true self. I mean, you can recognize your spiritual self, your higher self, which I imagine is in the psychosphere, and the synchronicities can help you connect and develop a dialogue between your higher self and your lower self here, which continues to need information. Some of you hear voices, I do, and those voices, you have to be careful. Intuition needs to be rationalized. You need to know which intuition is going to be useful and which isn't. You have to recognize the sound of the still small voice that might be useful to you. And as you do that and connect more with your higher self can help you connect with other people. And those higher selves connections are ways in which we can help each other and help mitigate not only the destruction we're doing to ourselves, but the destruction to the natural world around us. And coincidences can help you recognize that animals and plants are conscious beings also, and they like to communicate with us. They would like to communicate with you. They like to be paid attention to, and they can help you understand yourself. It's not just other people, not just coincidences with sitting next to somebody. It's what nature tells you, how nature speaks to you, can be ways for you to understand yourself and begin to experience even further the web, the mysterious, the wonderful web that we are all a part of. This is where I started. This is what I've been trying to say. This is where I've been able to say some ideas about what I've talked about today, meaningful coincidences. I talk about the psychosphere in here. I'm still developing the ideas for the psychosphere. And I hope you will join us at the Coincidence Cafe and perhaps read my book and join other people who want to tell each other coincidence stories. So I will end here and thank you very much for your attention and interest in this amazing subject.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Bernard.
You're welcome.
That was absolutely, absolutely fascinating.
Thank
Well,
you.
it is my pleasure now. So everybody hold your questions for after Dr. Juliet Trail. Then we will have a question and answer period where you can ask questions both of Dr. Beitman and Dr. Trail. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Juliet Trail. She is the managing director of the Coincidence Project, and she is also the founding director of Courageous Compassion Connection, which teaches contemplative practices to cultivate well-being and compassionate action to serve others. She is presented all over the world, including across the US, in the UK, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Rwanda. She has worked in education leadership, organizational development, and contemplative pedagogy at several universities. She's a trained mindful self-compassion teacher, and creatively, she is also a poet and a musician, singing and writing music in the bands Unheard Sirens, Inc. and Webweaver. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Juliet Trail.
Hello, thank you. Well, it's nice to see all of you. Thanks for those who have their cameras on. It's so nice when we can see one another. I appreciate being here with all of you. Cameras on or not, it's nice to be here with all of you. I'm going to also share some slides to help navigate this talk. So I thought I would speak with you today about my own sort of pathway through spiritual awakenings. So the connections to this organization and to the leaders of this organization, and touch upon how it relates to meaningful coincidences and my vision for a compassion revolution. All right. Well, first, I'll say, as there was a major event in my life when I was 7. My family was visiting the mountains and driving into the sunset as we'd gone to look at the leaves turning in the mountains. And the view was much like this. The sun came piercingly over the dashboard, and I was sitting in the back seat behind my mom and dad in the front seat. And a car had stopped to try to turn left off of the road, and we could not see the car because of how bright the sunlight was, and we ran into it at full speed. So we absolutely smashed this other car. And it was in the early 1980s, and there weren't seatbelt laws yet. There weren't even seatbelts in all of the seats of cars yet. And my mom was not wearing a seatbelt, so she slammed against the dashboard and her head went through the windshield. So what followed was a near-death experience of my mother. And they pulled her to the side of the road. The sun was setting. I remember it was dark when the ambulance arrived. So we were there at those last moments of sunset when the accident occurred. And I was just curled into her side, and they took her to the hospital. But what she was able to recall after this experience was the exact position where they put us on the hillside, the exact position from which the ambulance came, the logo of the ambulance, which county it came from. She was fully unconscious with her eyes closed, with a severe head wound, as well as some abdominal trauma from hitting the dashboard. And her head had been cut open very severely. So she was fully unconscious, but then she remembered the ride to the hospital and what was done in the ambulance. She remembered the treatment and care she received in the hospital. She could describe how many doctors and nurses were in the room, what corners they stood in, what they said, what medicines were given. And she could ask them. She asked about the logo of the ambulance and knew which county it was from. It was not the county we were in. Turned out there was another ambulance from a surrounding county that was closer. So it was unlikely that she would even know. And we weren't in a county we live in. We were many miles from home on a sightseeing expedition. And she corroborated with the doctors and nurses the things that she had witnessed during that out-of-body or near-death experience in the hospital. So all of this was relayed to me over time, over many years. It was a legend, it was a major, major fact of our family that this had occurred. And it turned out that my brother was in the womb at this time, and they didn't even discover that she was pregnant until almost her 6th month of pregnancy. She had to be in bed because of the head trauma. And so her nausea was taken to be not morning sickness, but head trauma. And so finally, when she was nearly 6 months pregnant, we all discovered she had been pregnant when the accident occurred. And so my brother came along a few months later. And has always seemed like a little bit of a mystical being, my brother. And as a toddler, he started asking her, Mom, can you please tell me the stories that you used to tell me when you were my blonde mom? And my mom had hair like me, red auburn hair. And he'd say, I want to know the stories when you had the long, straight blonde hair when you were my mom that time. And she got very freaked out about this, but he would bring it up. And he would often bring it up when she was giving him a bath or in the rainstorms. Something about water connected him to that memory. And he remembered, I spoke with him before this talk to ask him what he recalls about those past life recollections when he was a toddler. And he remembered it being on another planet, not this one. He had a clear sense of what year it was in the calendar system of that planet. It was 6,700 and something in the calendar system of that planet. And they were mother and son again in that life. And there were legends about how the storms were caused by the gods. And those were the stories he loved. So when it would rain or when they were in the bath, he would want her to tell him the stories of the gods and how the gods caused the weather. My mom was a very rational, logical, grounded person, but also spiritual and mystical. But she would never have said the storms came from the gods. That was not something from our life experience in this lifetime, and certainly seemed to point to way more in our reality than we normally think about. For myself, I also have experience traveling in my dreams, frequently flying. Whenever I lucidly dream, I almost always request to fly. I love it. And like the little girl in this painting that I found, I generally fly with my arms out. I can just soar, and maybe I flap a little bit. Sometimes I'm a point of consciousness, and it's just a consciousness soaring like a beautiful video. But a lot of times I have a body, and that body is one that has the gift of flight. And I have visited others in my dreams many times throughout my life. And sometimes they will contact me from far away and say, you came to me in my dream. I say, yes, I did. So there have been many times that this has been corroborated by the person that I go to visit, particularly when I'm worried about people. I'll go check in on them on the astral plane, I think, when I can't reach them in the physical one. I had a very interesting recurring dream about visiting another planet when I was little. I lived on a huge hill, this beautiful rolling hill, very steep, and it would become a trampoline, and I would bounce and bounce, and each bounce would give me more momentum, and I would keep bouncing every time higher, and I'd finally get this escape velocity reached, and I would shoot off out of the atmosphere. And my consciousness, this was not one where I had a body. I was much more of a point of consciousness in this recurring dream. I would shoot amongst the planets, and I would sort of play with them like a video game, shooting amongst the stars and navigating asteroid fields. And I would go to this one particular desert planet. It was very dry. and it had arches. In later life, I've seen photographs of Moab, Utah, and the Arches National Park. It was much like that landscape. But at the time I would have this dream, I'd never been to Moab, but it was like that. And I would shoot amongst all the arches. And finally, there was this beautiful oasis, and I would go, and it had a big swimming pool, and I love water. And I would hang out at this oasis with other people. And it was kind of like a vacation oasis that I would have a drink and sit as a child, and a teenager at the side of this pool. And it was quite lovely and somehow felt like a place I come from. So that was just part of my own mystical and spiritual awakening in life. Another thing I thought might interest people on this call is that I've had a series in my life of past life recollections that came in dreams. And each of those has happened. I drop into the person in the moments before their death, and sometimes experience their death, which is not fun. It's always only a couple of minutes. It's what the events that lead up to the reason this person dies, and everything about the person drops in. I know all these attitudes and backstory and relationships. Sometimes other people are in the room, in the situation with me, and I'll look at them and they have a different body, but I'll realize there's someone that I know in this lifetime in another way. So multiple times there are people I was still connected to, sometimes not very closely connected, just acquaintances. But I said, oh, that's so-and-so. Other times someone I was really closely connected to in this life. They've taken place. The first one and most poignant one was during the Holocaust. And I was quite obsessed with the Holocaust as a child. Every single book report in school, I read it starting when I was 11 years old. I would read tales of the survivors from the Holocaust and do book reports on them. Even in 9th grade biology, we could choose any topic. I chose to study what Joseph Mengele was all about with his genetic manipulation of people, because I wanted to know what would drive someone to do those things. And then the first memory dream that I had was when I was 15 or 16. It was after that project. And I remembered a life when I was a mother, and myself and my children were killed together. I've also remembered being in Egypt. I've remembered being in South America. I've remembered being in Salem, Massachusetts in various dreams. So for what that's worth, it's definitely part of my own spiritual awakening. I went on a vision quest out on top of the mountains. At the end of college, I was 21 years old. My grandfather had died earlier in the year, and there was a lot of sorrow in my family. He died relatively young. I think he was only about 70 or 71. And he came at the end of my quest, and he was standing off on top of a mountain, and he was sort of doing a little jig. He was dancing, and he was singing this silly nonsense song that he used to sing to me. And he was just smiling and laughing. And it was like I was having this beautiful, glorious experience dancing with the bugs and playing with the wind on my vision quest, just absolutely feeling the companionship of the entire mountain and all the beings on that mountain. I felt so joyful and at peace on that quest. And it was like he came to join me because that seemed like a lot of fun. He wanted to be at that party too. And I had aunts and my mom who were still deeply grieving, and was able to tell them, I felt like I saw him up on the mountaintop near me in the quest, and he was fine. So maybe we don't have to worry so much about him. Maybe our grief can begin to lessen and ebb away. So all of these things bring me to be delighted to work with Dr. Beitman and others on the Coincidence Project. I've experienced all kinds of, as you see, metaphysical, mystical experiences and meaningful coincidences. I'll tell you just a brief story to illustrate, because stories are a lot of fun. This is my brother, Robert, that sweet mercurial being of the memory dreams, past life memory dreams. And one day I had been walking with a good friend, and we were on a residential street, and I saw a little sign off in the corner of my eye that said free toys. I don't need toys, but some intuition in me said, go look. So I love to listen to those little voices. When I feel this little tug about something, I like to follow that. I wonder what that's about. I went through the little toys, and I pulled this one toy my brother's holding out because it reminded me of my brother, particularly when he's clean shaven. This toy looks an awful lot like my sort of redheaded brother. And I forgot about the toy. It was in a coat pocket. So weeks later, about a month later, I'm putting on my coat, and I'm hanging out with my brother and other people. I reach into the pocket, and there's the toy. I meant to give it to him. And so I pull it out. It's wearing the outfit my brother is wearing in this moment. My brother is also wearing brown shoes like the toy. He's wearing blue jeans that match the color blue on that toy. He's wearing a green sweatshirt with a pull tab, looks like the pull tab on that toy. And you know, it's a friendly little toy. So not only did I find a toy that reminded me of my brother, I happened to remember to give it to him by reaching into a pocket. Oh yeah, I had that toy. And lo and behold, my brother's in the outfit, as if to make it even more obvious. Yes, this toy kind of looks like, you know, my brother turned into a small toy form. So these are the kinds of coincidences that have all different kinds of meaning. This one just seems to be about, I don't know, connectedness, perhaps, with my brother and I, and that toy. So this is our website. I put a few links in the chat as Bernie was talking to get to the website at thecoincidenceproject.net. As he mentioned, our vision is to illuminate the invisible currents that connect and unify us. And so we are working to help cultivate more awareness and to inspire people to share their own experiences and to analyze those experiences, to look for the meaning. As Bernie mentioned, sometimes they're just a moment of possibility. They're an invitation. But if we pay attention to the invitation, we might act on it. So they can also inspire us to do new things. And then the coincidences can unfold. Perhaps the opportunity begins to open up. And it's not even this person you met, but then they introduce you to the next person, and that's the one you needed. So there's often a series of steps that we sort of flow through what the coincidences can offer. And in that way, we can discover our life purpose. We can have a deeper sense of wonder and awe and joy. And certainly for me, it brings into a tangible sense our interconnectedness with the web of all beings. And so for me, my particular focus is towards a compassion revolution. I believe that it is possible to have a nonviolent, beautiful, meaningful revolution in our world where we could be guided by compassion. And I'm currently working on a book on this subject. And I, as a musician and a poet, as Yvonne mentioned in the bio, I have written poetry throughout my life and also been a musician with several degrees in music. I try to turn these things into songs that go out as little heartbeam messages. You know, I envision this heartbeam radio that I'm sending out this message to the signal towers. I envision all of us as being people who are all attuning our radios to the same signal. We're amplifying the signal. This is one of my songs with Unheard Sirens Incorporated called All We, that really all the lyrics of the song are about my vision for compassion. You can see that Dr. Beitman is there in a cameo on the right, along with friends that are in Africa and in Europe and across the United States, all make cameos in the video because it is a vision about all of us and how we can all be together in this compassion revolution. So I wanted to share one poem with all of you, kind of closing out my remarks right now, and then we can shift to our Q&A. This poem is called Compassion Transmission. And I invite you, if you'd like to receive it almost as a meditation, you're welcome to close your eyes or just soften your gaze, paying less attention to what's outside, more attention to your body in this moment, your breath, and my voice as I share this compassion transmission with all of us. The voices most silenced are the ones most needed now. Not every generation has the opportunity to fight for freedom. So I don't want to back down because I'm not scared of it. Not scared of a little bit of chaos, a little disorder, and I'm not scared of otherness. Back in 1972, they showed the blue marble photo, our sweet ocean and sky planet viewed from space, and the world fell in love with the earth. We've got to remind people to fall in love with the earth again. There is no otherness. It's all just us. We're all connected. We're all pieces of one thing. And you kind of fall in love with it. But then you forget. We need to get the transmission. Ground control to compassion. Your loss is not my gain. Your win is not my loss. Put this on repeat until it's the top 40 word of mouth. We need the compassion, the empathy in action, the concrete language of love to speak in action, love in action, to fight for freedom for all of us, all beings, and our one world home. I thank you. I'll wrap that up then, and back to Yvonne.
All right. Thank you, Juliet. That was really, really wonderful. I'm going to bring Bernie back on as well. And we will now slowly shift into the question and answer portion. Both of your talks were really, really moving. Thank you. While people are thinking about their questions, write them into the chat if you have a question either for Bernie Beitman or for Juliet Trail. But I'm going to start with the first question because I have one for Dr. Beitman. Because I'd like you to tell us in more detail, please. Could you tell us the story exactly of what happened, that choking incident, like what happened to you and what happened to your dad? You referred to it, but you didn't actually tell us the story. I'd love to hear your story, please.
Thank you for asking. It was February 26th, 1973. And I was in a Victorian house in San Francisco, standing over a sink in this house, choking uncontrollably. Something had gotten stuck in my throat, stuck in my throat, and I couldn't get it out. And then finally, the choking stopped. And the next day, my brother called from Wilmington, Delaware, and said that our father had died at 2 a.m. Wilmington, Delaware time, which was 11 p.m. San Francisco time when I was choking uncontrollably. He had bled into his throat. He had a bleed somewhere in his throat, in his esophagus, I think, and choked to death on his own blood. So at the same time he was choking, as I mentioned, I was choking. And that was February 26th. The next day was my birthday, February 27th. So these were major emotional events for me, and helped get me going to talking to you right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Bernard.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. Now, somebody asked in the chat, I'm going to give this one to Juliet since Bernard answered the last one, wanting to know when your next Coincidence Cafe would be and how they can sign up for it.
Yeah, our next Coincidence Cafe is a very special edition of Cafe because it's going to be our Coincidence Project launch party. So that's on the third Saturday of February, which is February 18th. And I dropped the link to register in the chat up above. I'll drop it again in the chat now. And you can all save the chat. If you want to click on the little top 3 buttons next to your chat window when you have chat open, you can click Save Chat. So that's the February 18th registration link. And then it will continue as a series after that, the third Saturday of each month. And that's a separate link for the regular monthly session. So this is a standalone link for February 18th. And then you can register after that and come and go as you would like. Once you've registered for the monthly recurring series, you don't have to keep re-registering.
All right, thank you. And we have a follow-up question for Bernie regarding the choking incident. Leo would like to know, were you actually choking on an object? Or were you choking due to your connection with your father?
Second, there was nothing, I hadn't eaten anything. There was nothing in my throat that was specific. I was doing what he was doing.
Wow, that is really incredible. Somebody put in the word simulpathy.
Simulpathy, Ricardo knows that in that list of S's with ITYs is the term simulpathy, the experience of the pain of a loved one at a distance. That used to be what telepathy meant. Tele at a distance, pathy, feeling. So I put that telepathy became more cognitive. So I invented this term simul at the same time pathy to substitute so that it could be about feeling the pain of a loved one or distress of a loved one. If any of you ever read about identical twins, that's a not uncommon phenomenon with identical twins, and it gets kind of funny because one of the quotes was, one twin says about the other, "I wish Harry would take better care of himself. He causes me too much pain."
Someone else asked if it was possible for you to put up that slide again where you described the 4 types of experience, one being which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, simulpathy, that they wanted to be reminded of the 4 types of meaningful coincidences that you've identified. Would you be able to do that for us, please?
The four are synchronicity, serendipity, seriality, and simulpathy. And just keep in mind that synchronicity from Carl Jung has tended to be more psychological and interpersonal and spiritual, because that's Jung. Serendipity doesn't get a lot of play in the Western world, at least in the United States and Canada, but it's big in Europe. And serendipity is a very important idea in the way science proceeds, but it's also personal. Artists use it. It's finding things through happy accidents in ways that you never thought you would be able to. They just show up, and the discovery of penicillin is one of them. But there are plenty of other examples of simultaneous of finding things that you are surprised to find. And well, people like to talk about a blood pressure experiment, I think in London, trying to use this new pill for blood pressure and heart rate. And when and it was with men, and when they tried to get the men off this drug, they said, no, we want to keep going. We want to keep doing it. Why? Because it became the new Viagra. It became Viagra. It was. That's an illustration of like finding something you weren't looking for, but it becomes one of the major sellers in drug companies. And seriality is what I try to demonstrate with the S and the ITY. But some people do thousands of monkeys in various ways. Images of a monkey, or reading about a monkey, or advertising for a monkey. And this person who's telling me about this is monkey business. This is monkey playing around, and this is the monkey teacher that helps her evolve spiritually. So these are serialities, are things you can see, everybody can see who wants to look. And simulpathy is the experience of the pain of a loved one at a distance. And somebody just brought up simultaneous discoveries. And that's a little different, but it's a kind of seriality. And you're right to suggest that. But the fact that people find the same idea in different ways, calculus, evolution, and the discovery of lots of things currently are done simultaneously in people who don't have contact with each other. And this is before the internet. This is people working on their own. So it suggests that we share a consciousness, and that's what I call our mental atmosphere, which, as Juliet has to continue reminding me, also has emotions and spirituality in it. If anybody's interested, I'm trying to map this mental atmosphere and see how the thing works, because there's a lot of stuff going on in there. I'm seeing it, currents and information, energy floating around. It's kind of fun to try to imagine the real. And if there's anything that I could try to encourage all of us to do is don't let media and advertising and marketing and regular silly things that people focus on steal your imaginative capacity. Juliet told you a lot of imaginative ideas. Her mind flies in all directions, including being a rock and roll star. And Juliet, I think you ought to put your website link in the chat also.
I'm going to add Juliet here. We have the next question that is actually directed at both of you, but I'm going to ask Juliet to answer it first, since give Bernie a break for a minute here. And that is, Tim says, great presentation. Do either of you do any particular spiritual practices that make you more open to these sorts of experiences?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a wonderful question because when I'm not working on the Coincidence Project or my music, I'm a meditation teacher. So part of my spiritual awakening was not just the visitation of my grandfather on the Vision Quest, but really the Vision Quest itself, having a contemplative experience that induced a new way of seeing the world. Part of that was intensified through 96 hours of fasting in the wilderness, no food, no tent, no company, out alone, very, very high up in the mountains in my own spot where I did a solo with just water and my own thoughts for company. And I discovered all the insects and the wild horses and the weather and the leaves and the plants and the winds and the precipitation and the stars of the cosmos. I went all alone to discover how not alone I was. And that kind of experience is an epiphany that changes us forever. So it can be very nice to do retreats or other spiritual practices that really disrupt our normal business as usual day-to-day life. We rush around, we get into habits, and those habits allow us to kind of tune out to almost everything that's happening. You know, you drive and you get lost in your thoughts and you show up somewhere and you thought, how did I even get here? I hope I obeyed all this traffic lights because I wasn't really there. I spoke with a friend once who says, you know, I'm looking back at college and I recall a few stories, but it really feels like it all happened to someone else. It felt so distant. He wasn't really there. He was always achieving and rushing around. And this is how our life is. So things that slow us down and allow us to drop into the present moment can begin to shift our perspective from distraction and kind of half paying attention to things, being lost in thoughts about the past or the future. Being more present is a really good way to begin to be more connected to our own coincidence experiences. And we notice perhaps in the present moment when we have those little intuitive tugs, oh, talk to that person next to me, ask them why they're here, or go right instead of go left. And you think, why go right? I was definitely planning to go left. I don't know, but there's an intuition that says go right. If we're in the present moment, we can notice those little tugs or those questions, those insights that are coming to us. That's a wisdom that's perhaps from deep within us. Perhaps it's our kind of greater self beyond this lifetime that knows. Perhaps it's our connection to whatever we consider the universe or the divine. But there's a knowingness that can arise, and intuition is a good way to think about some of that knowingness or that curiosity. And it turns out there's something amazing on the other side of that. So any spiritual practice that helps you to get out of distraction and busyness and into a more calm, collected, present moment awareness, and to help cultivate inner creativity or connection to our intuition can be really helpful. So a lot of mindfulness and meditation can do that. Bernie and I are both deeply connected to nature, and Bernie hears and communicates in words with trees, and I connect deeply to all just the web of life of beings, and have had many beautiful synchronous experiences with being in nature with other beings of nature. So your contemplative practice could be something completely self-led, and it could be about getting away from the hubbub of the world and just being in nature and connecting there. So those are a few thoughts.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Juliet.
Oh,
I think
would you like to answer that as well? All right, I'll bring you
I
on.
would, and I would, and just more briefly, pretty much what Juliet is.
I'm having trouble finding your picture.
I'm here. I promise you. I'm still around here.
I don't know why I'm having trouble finding your picture to
You
bring
should
you
practice
on.
these
There
things.
you are.
Yvonne.
Here you
should have
are,
practiced
Bernie.
these things.
There you are. Please Please
Uh,
go ahead and answer that question.
There's
please.
I'm just basically a dumb jock. Played football and stuff and baseball, and I like running around. And I'm pretty narrow in some of the way that I do things. So my spiritual practice is pretty much evolving my experience of synchronicity. And what I've come to now, and it takes a while, it took me a while, I think it takes other people a while, to realize that so much that's around you is a mirror of your mind. And it's a hard thing to conceptualize. And that's a spiritual practice, is to see what out there is not only important for you to interact with, but also is a mirror of where you are currently. And I have that with patients. I don't like it. I don't like it, but by what they're going through, it's like I'm doing something like that. And that's my spiritual practice, mind mirroring.
Mhm. Thank you, Bernie. The next question's for you, so I'll keep you on while I ask it. Julie asks, what do you say to people that think fascination with synchronistic events indicates delusions of reference, magical thinking, or psychosis? Are these events driven by excess dopamine in the brain?
I'm the psychiatrist. I guess I should answer that one.
Yep.
What I try to say in my book is, yes, sometimes an excess of synchronicities is a symptom of psychosis. It is. Unfortunately, the mental health professionals know that's the reason, and it isn't just the only reason. And I try to describe people for whom it's a psychotic episode, but there's also something to learn from it. And there are other people who just have a lot of them, but they're overwhelmed by them. There's just too many of them, but they're functioning in their lives. Remember, psychosis, mental illness is usually not functioning very well, means you're not functioning very well, so that they are not able to manage all this input. And I'm trying to develop something called coincidence counseling, and have an example of having done that in my book and in my psychology website. A woman from Ohio drove to see me. It's a long story, but I helped her over 3 days, and she was able to make sense out of a lot of coincidences that were happening to her. So it's a range. And I love the question about dopamine. Oh, dopamine is now not such a prominent character in all our ways of thinking about it. Try thinking about the default mode network, which is that thing in our base of our brain that keeps us together with how we understand each other. But people are trying to figure out how the brain correlates with a lot of weird stuff, meditation included. It's been well studied. So it's just fun to speculate. It's the real problem, ladies and gentlemen, is how do mind and brain interact with each other? I mean, they forget that one. A lot of people go from brain to spiritual, but there's a mind somewhere in between there someplace. So let's see how the mind and brain and how individual minds relate to the higher consciousness. That's the thing that I'm most interested in encouraging to understand.
Awesome. I think our next question is also for you, Bernard, so I'll leave you up. This is from Christina, and she says, my brother has been going through intense medical treatments. Before knowing that he was intensive care, I experienced many of his emotions. In the past year, I often experienced his emotions and experiences in my body. He told me that he had been clinging to me for spiritual strength to survive. Any comments on that?
Simulpathy is real. It happens to people when they don't know it, because you got to tell each other about it. That when there is a strong bond, and I call this bond something to do with this word love. We don't know what it means a lot, but the love binds us, something like the way electrons are entangled, the way people talk about the quantum entanglement, but they're not the same. Quantum entanglement is a metaphor. Human beings get entangled not only with each other, but with their animals. And the animals, how many animals just pick up stuff from their human beings? And how many animals can find their way back to their human beings if they're lost? But people love, connected, twins, parent with child often, siblings, good friends. Juliet does that with a lot of good friends. Juliet is open and connects with lots of people. And sometimes you can feel too much from other people and too much simulpathity, but it's her story, your story, is a very wonderful example of simulpathity and how it can be a little disturbing for the person who's on the receiving end.
Mhm. I'm going to bring Juliet on now because we have another question about this, and I'd like to get Juliet's take on this whole topic. So building on what we've just been discussing, Ellen says, I have had several experiences to what happened with Dr. Beitman's dad. I have always heard it called a sympathetic illness, and distance is no factor. So Juliet, do you have any comments about this whole phenomenon, whatever name we're going to call it?
Yeah, and I think we don't have a common term yet because as Dr. Beitman was saying, it used to be telepathy. It used to be feeling together, telepathy, but then that became associated with thought. I think because we are a culture that overemphasizes mental thought and has de-emphasized our bodies, and our embodied knowing and emotions got lost. Now we have to reinvent the language again. So Bernie offers us the term simulpathity. You could easily call it simultaneous illness, and we're speaking about the same things. So it's good to find all the ways that we refer to it and link them up, because we're having the same conversation over and over and over in separate niches. We're all often little niches with jargon that's only specific. And one of the things we want to do with the Coincidence Project is surface all of this, the ways people refer to it, and bring people together to make sense and to connect. There's a bondedness. If you've had that experience with a loved one and someone else has as well, there's a certain bond to share more information about that. There might be a deep compassion and empathy that arises between people who've had similar experiences. So we hope to surface those different types, the simulpathity or simultaneous illness, or the insight of Christina, if that was the name, if I'm recalling correctly, of her sibling's illness, and that she's experiencing his emotions and some of his physical symptoms. My brother and I have this connection, and my brother will call me. He's on the road. He's on the road for his job. So he's often away in different states every day. And he'll call me and say, I'm experiencing such and such emotion. Is that you? Because it feels like it doesn't belong to anything happening in my life right now. And I'll say, yeah, that's me. So he's learned to start to diagnose if you are empathetic, if you are deeply connected to others, you may actually have their stuff come through, and your body or your psyche could become confused and say, it's me. I do think some people that are experiencing a lot of depression and deep anxiety, and including the kinds of ways that anxiety and depression can show up in illnesses of the body that become physical, materialized illnesses like fibromyalgia and migraines, all kinds of things. We sublimate, we turn our emotional experience that we can't digest, we put it in the body. It can manifest then as an illness that intensifies. I think some of the people experiencing those things are picking up on the psychosphere, the mental atmosphere of suffering, of distress. And it's become confused. They can't separate their own identity from the strength of these difficult negative emotions that they might be picking up or receiving. As I mentioned earlier, I see us as little radio signal towers, and other people can sometimes come in like static, like a radio that isn't tuned right, and all you get is but some people come through like a song, and you just barely meet them. And all of a sudden, you're in a harmony with them. You're resonating. And I'm a musician, so I see both the science of the frequency and the music, the beauty of the frequency. We are all vibrational beings. I saw Shanti, I think, post in the comments that she does never felt this before, but right now in this online Zoom electronic connection, she's feeling a sense of her own vibration rising. And it is possible. We've been seeing that a lot in our Coincidence Cafes, this sense of a deep rising and nurturing, supporting maybe an enhancement of our vibrational resonance together by connecting, even through technology. So I think this is all some of the same stuff of how we can harmonize with others that are like-minded and amplify the signal towards positive change in our world.
Awesome. I'm going to keep you on for the next question, and then I'll bring Bernie on if he'd like to also address the next question. By the way, I use the vocabulary clairsentience for people who can pick up on these vibrations, and other people use the words that they're an empath. when they're
Mhm.
able to pick up in these vibrations. So yeah, that many people have identified this, but are using different vocabulary. Julie has a long comment here, which I think you responded to a little bit, Juliet, but I wanted you to talk about it too. And Julie says, during my spiritual emergency, which I believe strongly is what it was, even though the hospital called it a psychotic episode, so it may have been misdiagnosed, synchronicities were very prominent. I noticed connections and patterns everywhere. I was delighted at first, and then it got overwhelming. Now, wherever I experience synchronicities, I get worried I might go into another spiritual emergency. There can be so many, it feels like the universe is screaming as well. This happens spontaneously, no drugs or intense spiritual practice. I don't think I'm a mentally ill person. I believe I'm having a spiritual experience. Do you have any advice on what I can do next time that I feel I'm getting flooded with too many synchronicities?
Yeah, thank you. This is an area of particular expertise of one of our board members named Chris Mackey, as well as Dr. Beitman here on the call today. So I did drop in the chat a link to the bio for Chris Mackey because he is in Geelong, Australia. He himself had his own hospitalization. He's a clinical therapist. He's been practicing, I think, more than 3 decades. He was hospitalized for depression and has had some manic episodes as well in which synchronicities went wild. So he's able to combine his direct personal experience with his therapeutic background. And he really helps to counsel people that are feeling overwhelmed or worried about an explosion of synchronistic experiences. It's really the focus of his life's work. So I do encourage any of you that connect with this concept of having too many and being worried and perhaps having been diagnosed in some way for these experiences, when you need to tease that out, Dr. Beitman and then Chris Mackey are 2 people that I would certainly recommend for further study. And Chris has a lot of presentations and things. He has a YouTube channel. All of that's linked on his bio page. So if you go through our website for Chris Mackey's bio page, you can get to his podcast, his blogs. He has an article on, is this a psychosis or a spiritual awakening or spiritual emergency, I think he calls them. So it's almost directly some of the words that Julie was using in her comment. And I would say that at this time, it seems humans are being invited to continue evolving. I suspect that we are on the cusp of growing from Homo sapiens sapiens into something that comes next. That's just my personal viewpoint. That's the evidence based on my own life experience and working on this global coincidence project. I think we're being invited to awaken. And I think that the invitations to awaken, I saw Robert's comment in the chat also about a sense of a download when a lot of information drops in. And we talked to a lot of people, a lot of our colleagues and board members and myself. We've had that kind of experience of a download, a bunch of stuff coming through all at once that comes from beyond our own inherent knowing. And where does it come from? I saw Robert say in the question, where does it come from? That's the great question, isn't it? The mystery that can drive our lives. How do we understand the greater meaning of this universe? And do we wish to use the term God or some similar deity term, or do we just call it the universe? You know, the web of all creation, it seems to have a beautiful entanglement, you know, that's going on. And I think that the awakening that humanity is being invited towards is to become more holistically oriented, to get away from a narrow, isolated sense of ego or self, and to be more in tune with a collective shared understanding. And seeing synchronicities and coincidences occurring like popcorn, you know, rapid fire going off like fireworks all around you, I think can be a spiritual awakening itself. It's a process of bringing to your attention, perhaps knocking you over the head if you try to ignore it. Sometimes I've heard people say, I was trying to ignore the little coincidences, and then a catastrophe occurred. And it was like, you just couldn't. You know, one of our board members, her house burned down, and she had been asking how to get out of her life because she felt trapped in it, but she wasn't doing anything about leaving. She just kept asking. Well, everything she owned, including all of her work and all of her technology and computers, it all burned down. So that was how she got out of her life. There was no choice left but to start the new life. And she kind of backed herself into a corner because maybe she could have acted sooner and had less of a catastrophe occur. So some of these things that feel like a breakdown, I think, are the cusp of a breakthrough. And I do think they are increasing. It seems like it. Maybe we're just normalizing the ability to talk about it, and it's always been here. It's hard to know, but we do feel, all of us on the Coincidence Project, that we're hearing more and more of it. People throughout my lifetime have talked about the sense of reality speeding up. So maybe our awakening and our articulation of our awakenings is speeding up as well. I don't know, but that's certainly what we perceive as a group. I think everybody involved with the Coincidence Project would say it seems like this is increasing.
Awesome. Bernard, I'm bringing you back on because I'd also like to hear what you'd like to say about advice on what to do if you feel a person feels they're being flooded by too many synchronicities.
Juliet, thank you. Juliet gave us a hint. I wonder if the person is ignoring the little ones, because you may as well get used to the fact that there are a lot of them around. And if you only get hit with the big ones, that can be overwhelming. But if you start paying attention to the little ones, then you get used to them. And what does getting used to them mean? You got to figure out what is trying to be communicated to you. The woman from Ohio I mentioned needed to get out of her marriage and needed to be more self-reliant. And it was that simple. It was more than that. She started seeing more going on around her. So what is this overwhelming number of coincidences trying to say? Now, it's possible that it's a reflection of a manic episode, which mania increases the number of coincidences, or hypomania. I don't know, but if you have thoughts speeding up, could be hypomanic. Doesn't mean you have to take any pills for it, but you have to be recognizing that something's going on that you have to be able to learn how to deal with before you get into that state.
Thank you, Bernard. We have another very interesting question, which I'm actually going to get both you and Juliet to answer. I'll get you to answer it first, Bernard, since you're still on. And this is from Shanti, and she says, what if the same coincidences or synchronicities are happening to many people? And then related with that, can there be a mass psychosis?
Or a mass awakening? I just have to, I want to know what she's talking about, because I love hearing stories about multiple people having similar coincidences, like people having the same dream or sharing a dream, or three people sharing a dream. We're more connected. Our minds are more connected than we know. And the discovery of so many things, as I mentioned, simultaneous independent discoveries suggest that minds are connected. But I love hearing that there are people who I mean, part of the problem is knowing. How do you know that multiple people are experiencing the same or similar coincidence? Key question. But if you do know that, I want to know what that coincidence is.
Well, I can tell you one right now, and then I'll be interested to hear your comment and Juliet's. That's the founding of Spiritual Awakenings International. I had just met Robert Baer. We were having a conversation, and he got one of these downloads that is, he says, Yvonne, I'm getting this download. I think we're supposed to start another organization that looks at all types of spiritually transformative experiences. And so I said, well, I have to meditate on this, which I did. And then as soon as I got still in meditation, I got the download. Yes, you two are to start a new organization, and you're going to call it Spiritual Awakenings International. So this is the result of a shared synchronicity. We call it a shared download. Do you want to comment on that, Bernie? And then I'll give it over to Juliet.
Well, that's only two people. I want to hear like a group of people. I mean, Juliet was available. I wanted somebody to work with. We did it, and it worked. And something like what you just described. But I want to hear what Shanti was talking about. I think a bunch of them. So that's what I'm more interested in.
All right. And Juliet, any comment on that?
Yeah, well, I saw Shanti added to the chat, and when someone crosses over, and lots of people share their stories online, and you can start to see connections or similar experiences. And we do see a lot of meaningful coincidences that are around a sense of being contacted by those who've passed over. And you know, such a being on the other side might not be limited to interact with one person. It might be interacting with many members of its community, of that person, his or her community. As I mentioned, my grandfather visiting me on the mountain on Vision Quest, you know, I included that one because it felt like that's a part of perhaps our spiritual awakening. And Bernie has a wonderful podcast called Connecting with Coincidence. You can link to it from the Coincidence Project website too. And Carol Bowman is someone who has focused in her life's work on interviewing people that have connected with loved ones who've passed over, and also children who have memories of past lives. So that's an episode, Carol Bowman and Bernard Beitman talking on Connecting with Coincidence, that really speaks a lot to that example Shanti's given. I will also say we have Coincidence allies, some wonderful people that work on this with us that are not on the board, but they're part of the project. Trish and Rob McGregor are two such people. They're a couple. They've written dozens upon dozens upon dozens of books on these topics. And they had me come and have a conversation with them on their podcast called The Mystical Underground. And we actually talked about this issue for a little bit of time that Shanti's asking about with the collective aspect of this. Is it mass psychosis? The examples that Trish brought up in that conversation were about Earth empaths, or perhaps their weather or cultural event empaths. The number of people that dreamt about some of the great tsunamis who've come in our lifetimes is phenomenal. People anticipated the event. Many people also had dreams and visions, and it was depicted in several movies, the falling of the Twin Towers. Over and over and over, people kind of seemed to see 9/11 occur before it occurred. There were many people that reported having anticipated the Titanic sinking. So when there are really great natural weather events or massive cultural disruptions, lots of people may come to the surface and actually articulate the fact they saw it, they had it in a dream, they had it as a foretelling or a misgiving. Jung wrote about it, some of that, I think, envisioning that World War II was to come, that people start to sense something difficult in the future. Part of what might be happening is that time may be completely an illusion. And if things are happening at all points simultaneously, and we just simply happen to be beings who kind of go from one lily pad to the other, and the ones behind us we call the past, and the ones to come we call the future, and we just hop on a certain trail. But if that's not the full nature of reality, then perhaps our consciousness is more expansive than the being who has to go from the thing called the past into the present, out into the future. Perhaps our minds are contacting into great events that I think have deep resonance. They make reverberations, great tragedies, wars, tsunamis, earthquakes, natural disasters, things like 9/11. They have shockwaves through the psychosphere, and I think they're echoing out through time. I think they have shockwaves that some people who are sensitive and attuned to these things are going to experience, perhaps through visions or dreams or some sense of knowing that comes through. And I think they're contacting into the fact that time is a third dimensional thing, but there are many dimensions beyond that. So I think perhaps that's how we get mass events. I wouldn't therefore assign all of it to be a psychosis. We can get a lot of people believing things together, and some of that can be troubling. So I think there are issues around mass psychosis to be dealt with. I sometimes wonder what many people in my own country of America are thinking. And I watch the way they seem to perceive and think as a group that I feel not connected to. And I wonder how this is happening. Feels like mass psychosis to me. But I think there's also great awakening and tapping into all that is across or outside of time in some sense.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we're going to wrap up the question and answer period now. This was awesome. There were some comments there about we can also call these things premonitions, and which is the point that we talked about before, that we may use different words, but this meaningful coincidences, whether we want to call them synchronicities, premonitions, clairsentience, is all part of the spectrum of spiritually transformative experiences and spiritual awakenings happening on the planet today. So thank you so much, Dr. Bernard Beitman, and thank you so much, Dr. Juliet Trail. This was an absolutely fabulous presentation, and I'm sure many, many people are going to enjoy watching this video over and over again to hear some of your pearls. So thank you very, very much.